Welcome to the video lecture on phonics. We'll go ahead and start out with what is phonics. Phonics is a system of relationships between letters and sounds in a language. Orthography is the spelling patterns of written language, while phonology is the sounds in speech. So for example, when your kindergarten student learns that the letter B has the sound of B, and your second grader learns that T-I-O-N sounds like shun, they are learning phonics. Phonics explains the relationship between phonemes and graphemes. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sound and are written with backslashes, which we have 44 phonemes in the English language. Graphemes are the written form of a phoneme. Learning phonics helps students learn to read and spell. Written language can be compared to a code, so knowing the sounds of letters and letter combinations helps students decode words as they read. Knowing phonics also helps students know which letters to use as they write words. One of the major difficulties that students can have while learning to read is understanding phonics. Failure to grasp that printed symbols represent the sounds of spoken words make it impossible to become a fluent reader. Students typically learn phonics in kindergarten through second grade. We definitely want it wrapped up by the time third grade approaches or third grade ends. Students who are unable to link letters to the sounds, which is phonics, will struggle to read. Research shows that phonics instruction is essential for any program to teach students how to read. In fact, without an understanding of the relationship between letters and sounds, the process of reading simply cannot occur. Synthetic phonics is the process in which words are broken up into smallest units of sounds, which, as we described before, is called phonemes. Students are taught the letters, the graphemes that represent phonemes, and also learn to blend them or synthesize them, hence the name synthetic phonics. For example, a student is taught to read the letters in a word like B-A-T and then merge them to pronounce the word bat. A phoneme can be represented by 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters. For example, O-U-G-H in dough. In kindergarten, children usually learn the sounds of consonant letters, all the letters except the vowels, A, E, I, O, and U. First and second graders typically learn all the sounds of letters, letter combination, and word parts such as ing and ed. They practice reading and spelling words containing those letters and patterns. Second graders typically review and practice the phonics skills they have learned to make spelling and reading smooth and automatic. Of course, there are some words that cannot be learned by breaking them into smaller parts. Children must learn them by sight, and these words are known as sight words. As a refresher from last week, the 100 sight words make up more than 50% of the words that we speak and write. These 100 sight words or high-frequency words should be learned by first grade. There's a list of 300 high-frequency words that make up nearly 3/4 of the words that people read and write. These 300 sight words should be learned by second or third grade. Each student truly varies in the amount of phonics instruction they need and when they need it. Some students need very little phonics instruction, while others still benefit from phonics instruction in third grade. But many students with dyslexia benefit from phonics instruction even beyond the third grade point. The alphabetic principle, simply put, it's the idea that letters and letter patterns represent the sounds of spoken language. Learning that there's a predictable relationship between sounds and letters allows students to apply these relationships to both familiar and unfamiliar words, and they begin to read with fluency. Similar to fluency impacting students' comprehension, phonics has a great impact on students' fluency. All of the reading skills that we'll be working on throughout this semester are closely connected to one another. But in order for students to be fluent, they need to be able to understand phonics and that relationship between the letters and the sounds that represent the phonemes and the graphemes. Phonics rules and exceptions. Typically, we teach the letter-sound relationships explicitly and in isolation. There are quite a few different rules, and of course, as you all know, because you are all English speakers, there are a lot of exceptions to the rules. Some examples of a rule is if a word or syllable has one vowel and comes between two consonants, the vowel is usually short. And then it gives some CVC words as examples. The second one is when a syllable ends in a silent E. That silent E is a signal that the vowel in front of it is long, often called the magic E or the bossy E. A closed syllable has an exception to the rule. So a closed syllable can only have one vowel, and it's followed by one or more consonants. The vowel sound is always short, for example, last or napkin. The exception of this rule are IND, ILD, OLD, and so on. For our instruction, we need to provide opportunities for students to practice these letter-sound relationships in daily lessons. It has to become a part of their world. Providing those practice opportunities that include new sound-letter relationships, as well as cumulatively reviewing the previous taught relationships, is your best approach. We need to give students opportunities early and often to apply their knowledge of sound-letter relationships to the reading of phonetically spelled words that are familiar in meaning authentic learning, real-world type learning. We need to recognize that children learn sound-letter relationships at different rates. This is a challenging one because we're living in a world of assessment and testing, but phonics, more so than a lot of the different skills, students hit this at much different rates and different levels, and we have to be understanding of that as teachers. We need to introduce consonants and vowels in a sequence that permits children to read words quickly. And so, for example, when we're teaching consonants, it's a good idea to teach those consonants that aren't easily mistaken for others. So, for example, the consonant P, P. It's not often confused with others, and it's good to start out with those first, followed by the vowels, that we can easily start putting those together. But you never want to teach two sounds and then, for example, a consonant digraph. When we combine two consonants and it makes a new sound, we want to first teach the sounds and the visual representation of that sound of the C and the H separately before we teach students the combined sound, the consonant digraph. Typically, we're introducing sound-letter relationships in a range from 2 to 4 letter sound relationships a week. And so we're not introducing a lot at a time, but we are going at a pretty decent pace. Avoid simultaneous introduction of auditorily or visually similar sounds and letters. And there's a lot of really good charts out on the internet that will help you with the sequence of what consonants should you teach first, then what vowels should you teach. A lot of different charts available for teachers out there. Introduce single consonant sounds and consonant blends, clusters, and separate lessons, like I said earlier. and provide blending instruction with words that contain the letter-sound relationship children have previously learned. And so definitely look up the different sequence, and it's a very systematic process as well as explicit. Let's see. We covered most of this talking about explicit instruction in isolation. So what that means is when we have the modeled instruction, guided, and independent practice, that is explicit instruction. Students need the daily opportunities to not only practice, but also apply the letter-sound relationships that they've been learning. The role of phonics in a balanced literacy program, you definitely don't want to think of phonics completely by itself. It needs to be part of also teaching fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. And so it's a part of a bigger picture. It's definitely systematic. There's a certain order that you want to teach phonics in, and it's intensive. It happens kindergarten and first grade, second grade. They're really practicing the skills that they learned in kindergarten and first grade and should have it down by the time third grade approaches. And in addition to what our textbook says, the National Reading Research also completed some intensive research and found that not only, like the book, systematic and explicit, beginning in kindergarten and first grade, but increased phonics knowledge improves word recognition, spelling, and comprehension, like we talked about earlier. It benefits all students regardless of socioeconomic status, which is a big finding when you start looking at the research for students with comprehension and how socioeconomic status does affect student comprehension. So if we can really hit on this phonics early on in that kindergarten, first, and second grade levels, we can start to combat some of that effect from socioeconomic status. And really most benefits are for students having difficulty learning to read. And like we said earlier, some students might not need as much phonics instruction and some might need more. Some different phonics strategies, and I'll call them best practice as well. Like we've talked about earlier, explicit instruction is important. Teaching words from part to whole is part of explicit instruction, beginning with teaching letters, the graphemes, and sounds, the phonemes. Explicit instruction teaches students strategies that can be applied again and again to new words. Matching books to phonics features is a common approach that you see in classrooms. I have a really good, the Old Lady Who Swallowed series. I have that's linked to different consonant sounds, different digraphs that any of you are welcome to borrow anytime you want. But it really helps when you match the reader's interest to the phonics features, their reading level. Careful pairing of reading with phonics provides opportunities to apply what is learned about letters and sounds to reading words and the stories that are more authentic for students, part of their world. We'll go on to alphabet matching. The alphabetic principle, which is what we talked about, understanding there's a systematic and predictable relationship between written letters and spoken sounds. The alphabet matching helps students explore alphabet letters and sounds. Going on to analogy, excuse me, analogy phonics. This is, this is teaching students unfamiliar words by analogy to known words. So, for example, recognizing the rhyme segment of an unfamiliar word is identical to that of a familiar word. And so, for example, if we have the word cat, we know that the rhyme is AT. And so if we come across the word bat and we don't know the word bat, but we do know the word cat, we can apply the same structure by analogy to the word that we do know. Analytic phonics is teaching students to analyze the letter-sound relations. So really teaching students the ability to recognize letter-sound relations in previously learned words to avoid pronouncing sounds in isolation. The benefit is helping to code words by using those letter-sound relationships. And embedded phonics is simply embedding phonics instruction in text reading, which that's more the implicit approach, and we've been talking a lot about the explicit approach, but both have their place. But you definitely want to start out by teaching the skill and the strategy explicitly, and then moving into the implicit instruction. Assessing phonics knowledge, like we talked about with fluency, is very important. You need to be able to show their progress. You need to be able to monitor students' ability so that you know what to teach them to make those instructional decisions for each student in your class. There are a lot of different ways to assess phonics. It's much simpler than assessing fluency. It can be done through tests, observations, reading and writing samples, and many more things. So there's a quick look at phonics. There's a lot to it, and it can seem overwhelming at first, but once you get into it, it's really not that overwhelming. But just remember, overall, there is a specific sequence to it. There's a lot of different there's a lot of different resources out there to help you with that, of which consonants to introduce first, followed by which vowels, and then in first grade and second grade, starting to get into those digraphs and those consonant blend type skills. Definitely assess, use explicit instruction, help students with strategies, and with phonics, students will be able to read and will greatly improve their fluency, which we know has an impact on comprehension.